You're on the line with Jamal Meeks, former Indiana Hoosier, number 23, 1992. And I'm on the beat with Jim Cole.
Today's guest is brought to you by Reynolds Family Dentistry of Sellersburg. You need $1 million smile for those championship photos, and that's exactly what you'll get with Reynolds Family Dentistry. Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle Larry, coming to you from the Golf Club Eagle Point Studios, powered by Rivals here on this Wednesday, and could not be any more excited now to be joined by probably the most well-renowned sports writer of our time, John Feinstein. John, how are you, sir?
Jim, Todd, I'm fine, dealing with what we're all dealing with, and just hoping that the end is somewhere at the end of this long tunnel, and that the light, whatever light we see, turns out to be the end of the tunnel and not a train.
Yeah, especially you're up in New York, man. You're in the hot spot of this. I mean, what's it like living in that situation? It's got to be just mind-boggling all the time.
Yeah, you know what? It's eerie, Jim. We don't go out much, my family and I. But when we do, I went to the grocery store the other day to get some stuff, and you have to wear a mask to get inside the grocery store. And the weirdest part of it isn't so much that everybody's wearing a mask, it's that nobody will look at one another. It's a little bit like being in a Star Trek episode. And it's just an eerie time. I said to someone earlier this morning, my biggest challenge every day is waking up in the morning and figuring out what day it is. Because every day is pretty much the same around here. I've got plenty of work to do. I'm not bored or anything like that, but it's an eerie time, I think, in all our lives.
I see a new Feinstein book coming out of this.
Along those same lines, I mean, I understand what you mean, because I was at the grocery store, and when I would pass people, like I would say, excuse me or whatever it was, and then I was like, man, I wonder if they don't even want me to say excuse me because they don't want me to breathe extra or
right.
Get anything. It's just funny, like exactly what you're talking about. Like people they like turn away from you. Everybody's turning their shoulders when they pass each other. It's it is strange, and it's just I don't even know how we come out of this. It's crazy.
Well, it's going to take a while, and I keep hearing people saying, well, we've got to get the economy going, and of course we'd love to get the economy going, and those of us who love sports and work in sports would love to see sports start again. But the thing we all have to understand is if we try to come back too soon, we're going to plunge ourselves back into another pandemic like the one that's going on now, and that's the last thing in the world anybody wants.
Absolutely. John Feinstein is known for so many books. There's more books. I didn't realize, I'll be honest with you, the depth of how many books you had. And so I started getting into it, and because I'd read several of them. Todd's read more. What was your famous quote a minute ago, Todd? I love this.
Which one?
Todd Leary about
I got a lot of famous quotes.
Well, I mean the books. How many you've read more books of whose?
Yeah. So this is not any special anything for you, John, but because I'm not a very smart human being, but I have read more of your books than any person in the world, primarily because my life's revolved around sports and obviously with basketball and the Coach Knight book and that stuff, but the golf books and I've been an avid golf fan ever since I graduated from college. So all of the stuff on golf and everything. And it's just, it's funny. We were talking about it earlier in the week about you being on here. And like, I think you're the most famous household name in the state of Indiana that really doesn't have anything to do with the state of Indiana. You weren't part of any of the universities.
I appreciate that, Todd. And I understand what you're saying. Because obviously I lived in Indiana for 6 months. And was basically in the bubble that you lived in when you played at Indiana every day. But when I travel to Indiana, which of course I've done many, many times through the years, it's interesting that how many people do recognize me, and that almost all of them are very kind to me. That they liked Season on the Brink. They thought Season on the Brink allowed people who didn't understand what Bob Knight did as a coach to understand it, to understand there was a method to the madness.
Sure.
You'd be amazed the letters that I got and still get from Kentucky fans who say, well, I will never like Bob Knight, but I respect him now, having read your book. And I will say that my brother, who is an avid golfer like you, Todd, and a very good golfer, years ago played in a pro-am event out there in Indianapolis, and one of the guys he was playing with turned to him and said, "I bought your brother's book. I used it for firewood." And my brother said, "Listen, build a bonfire if you want, as long as you buy the book. That's fine."
Yeah, use the books. Right.
Yeah, but most people in Indiana, I think, especially because people in Indiana understood Bob Knight better than 99% of the rest of the world, and so I don't think any of them were shocked. Wow, Bob Knight uses profanity. No kidding. But I think they found because of the access that Bob gave me, they found the anecdotal storytelling that I was able to do fascinating, because I was an outsider who was on the inside for that season.
It truly, I think that there's almost two groups of people in the state of Indiana, and I'll use IU fans as the example, is if you haven't read the book, and I've said this over the years, this has nothing to do with interviewing you. Like, if you haven't read the book, it's almost like you don't have the inside information and know what things are really like. Like, that's how important that book is to IU fans and people. Like, anyone that argues something about Bob Knight, they would be like, "Well, did you read this in Season on the Brink?" And they're like, "Well, no." And they're like, "Well, read the book and then get back to me." It's like, if you haven't done your research yet, so you don't know, you can't have this conversation.
Yeah, and sometimes I wrote a column in the Washington Post when Bob went back to Assembly Hall this February, and I know you were there, Todd. The column I thought was very balanced. I said, look, you can't excuse some of the things that he's done. He is a bully, and there have been times when he's turned on friends, whether it was Mike Krzyzewski or Steve Alford or Jim Cruz or people like that. But you have to acknowledge, A, that he was a great coach. I mean, anybody who says that he wasn't doesn't know anything about basketball. And B, that he touched a lot of lives in a very positive way. And guys like Todd, who played for him, I know that while you were there, you every day was hell, because that's what it's like to play for Bob Knight. But I also know, without knowing you, that you look back on that experience and said it helped shape your life. And almost every guy I've ever talked to who played for Knight for 4 years or 5 years will say that same thing. You wouldn't believe the vitriol in some of the comments made about the column. How can you defend this guy who did this? How can you, and my answer was, my general answer was, I know you never read the book. Because if you'd read the book, you'd understand why I wrote what I did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just amazing. Quick, have you ever been interviewed by a former IU basketball player?
Joe Hillman.
Oh, dang.
Joe Hillman, when he was working in Indy. Years ago, Joe was on a radio show. I know he also did television. But so Joe would be the one who comes to mind right away. I mean, I've obviously still talk to some of the guys I dealt with when I did the book. But I think Joe's the only one who ever actually interviewed me.
One of the questions I had, and this will just show you that I'm not that smart of an individual, but I do love your work, and I enjoy all the golf stuff, especially. But a Season on the Brink, just from a novice who has absolutely no clue, do you do all the research and write the book and then try to figure out what the title's going to be, or do you kind of have a title going into it and you're figuring out how to fit that narrative?
I almost never have a title going into a book, Todd. Sometimes you have a working title, for the sake of the publisher, because publishers aren't very bright and they need things like that. But I never start to write until I'm done with my research. And the reason for that is simple. I don't feel as if I can write the beginning until I know the ending. So with Season on the Brink, with every book I've ever done, I finish my research. Now, I may have to, I always say to people at the end of an interview, hey, if I forgot something, can I call you back? Because that does happen. So while I'm writing, I might go, geez, I forgot to ask that, and I might call somebody. But 99% of the research is done when I start to write. As far as titles are concerned, it's totally random how I get my titles. The title for Season on the Brink came from a day in Minneapolis. The team had lost the night before at Iowa badly. I mean, the game was over by the second TV timeout. And naturally, Bob was furious. We almost crashed taking off from Iowa City. The plane did a 360 on the runway. And it's kind of funny because we're going down the runway, and Bob is railing about the fact that we'll never be any good until we get rid of Alford, as he called him. Not Alford, Alford. And, he can't guard anybody, and he's a terrible leader. And the plane does this 360, and there's dead silence. And the pilot comes on and says, well, folks, runway's a little bit slick. We're fine, though. We'll go back, try it again. And nobody's talking at that moment because we're all scared to death. And the plane takes off, and we're fine. And Knight picks up in mid-sentence and goes, and I'll tell you another thing about Alfred. So the next morning, we're in Minneapolis. We've been up to like 3, 4 in the morning watching tape, of course. And walking out of breakfast, a Minneapolis columnist named Sid Hartman, who was a friend of Knight's, you probably encountered him while you were playing there,
for sure.
Todd,
yeah, for sure.
Has come in, and, of course, Bob's not talking to anybody. And Sid figures out that his best target to get a response is probably me. And he says, so, what are you going to do all day here in the snow in Minneapolis? And I said, Bob was a few steps ahead of us. I said, well, I'm going to do what I do every day, Sid. I'm just going to follow Knight around. And as we learned in the incident that led to Bob being fired, he doesn't take well to being referred to as Knight. Right. Even though I was not speaking to him, I was speaking to Sid. And Bob whirled on me and came back and said, you don't ever call me Knight. How dare, who do you think you are? You're 28 years old. You don't call me that. You call me Coach. You call me Bob. You do not call me Knight. And I just looked at him. I said, I'll see you at practice. Because I knew getting into an argument with him in front of the coaches was a lost cause. So I went for a walk in the snow. And as I was walking around, I said to myself, every day we're on the brink of some disaster. Every day. And I thought, uh-oh, that's the title. Season on the Brink.
Yep.
And Good Walk Spoiled, my first golf book, the title comes from Mark Twain, who once said golf is a good walk spoiled. I figured, why not steal from the best?
There you go. Yeah, I guess that's better than a walk in the snow, right? All Season on the Brink, better than a walk in the snow.
I hope so. It seemed to be.
It's funny, just that description of everything. It just you're right. Like it is. It's hard to describe to people because it almost sounds like you are not as a former player and someone who feels so fortunate to have had that opportunity. It almost feels like you are not appreciative of the opportunity when you say like every day for 5 years is miserable and terrible. and I mean that in the best way possible, but it just really is. It's not. It's not just fun for 5 years. And so I get what you're saying. And I also, we had more than one of those scary moments on the plane. I swear when we lost to Purdue one year, he tried to bring the plane down. We were midair.
I believe it.
He was ramming himself against the side of the plane, trying to flip the thing over. I'm telling you, and that's no joke.
No, and none of those are jokes. And there's a story that I was told that I'm going to block on the name of the player. It was not a guy who was with the team when I was there. But Knight had gotten so mad at him in practice. They were getting ready to go play at Michigan, that he said, you're not playing tomorrow. You're just not playing. I can't play you. That was one of his phrases. I can't play you. And they go up and they lose at Michigan, and he gets on the plane, and there's McDonald's on the runway that the managers have brought to eat on the plane going back. And so he's sitting in the back of the plane. He says, oh, the only good thing about this is he can't yell at me because I didn't play today. And so, of course, Knight gets on the plane, takes all the McDonald's, throws them on the runway so nobody's going to eat, and goes straight back to him and starts screaming in his face, if we could play you, we wouldn't lose a game like this, but we can't play you. And the whole tirade was directed at him, even though he hadn't played a minute.
Yeah.
That's
very familiar. Very familiar with that.
We can talk all day long simply about that book, but your body of work is crazy. But you have a new book out, The Back Roads to March. Again, another great story of college basketball, but this is from a different angle. The unknown, the unheralded of college basketball, it says. But these are the guys that truly make the story that we love so much, which is March Madness.
Yeah, Jim, when I was a young reporter at the Post, I was actually the night police reporter, but I moonlighted in sports, and I covered the college hoops teams in Washington that none of the big time guys wanted to cover. I became friends with Gary Williams because he was the coach at American at the time, and I went and covered his team. George Washington, Howard, Navy, and I loved it because people were actually glad to see you when you walked in, whether it was practice or a game or going in the locker room to talk to the players. It was to me, there was an intimacy to the reporting that allowed me to write well about these guys, and I've gone back to that frequently throughout my career because I'm a believer, again, having been a police reporter, that you don't have to be rich and famous to have a story to tell. You don't have to be Bob Knight. You don't have to be Mike Krzyzewski or Tiger Woods or any other famous person in sports you might care to name. And I've covered many of them through the years. But I wrote a book on the Army-Navy football rivalry years ago. None of those guys played in the NFL, but they had great stories to tell. I wrote a book about Patriot League basketball 20 years ago. Again, guys had great stories to tell. And this was a chance for me to go back to that kind of reporting, to go cover mid-major players, coaches, teams who aren't on ESPN, Dick Vitale never once called any of these guys a diaper dandy. They're not going to be mentioned in the NBA lottery. One of the kids I interviewed, one kid, was drafted in the second round coming out of college. He played at Hofstra. He was the second leading scorer in the country. And I wrote about guys who I think had stories to tell. And I think the book in many ways was symbolized by a kid named Bjorn Broman, who played at Winthrop. And I was at the Big South tournament. Winthrop is losing in the first round, and they're getting beat pretty badly by Charleston Southern. And I'm watching this kid who I'd never seen play, I'd never heard of before that day, and he's diving all over the court. He's still making backdoor cuts to get layups. He hits a bunch of threes. He scored the last basket of the game, which gave him exactly 1,000 points in his college career, exactly 1,000 points. And it was his last game because they lost. And I went to talk to him afterwards I said to him, "You guys are losing by 20. You know, you're still out there giving everything you've got." And he said, "Look, I've played basketball all my life. Basketball is my first love and will always be my first love. But I'm done. I know I'm not going to play at the next level. I know this was my last game, and I didn't want to stop playing until the buzzer sounded." And people sometimes think because you have more talent, you care more. You know, this Jordan documentary, which is all about how competitive Jordan was. Well, we all knew that, for goodness sake. But I'm telling you, I wrote about kids who were every bit as competitive as Jordan, cared every bit as much about playing basketball as all the guys in the NBA did, and just weren't as talented, but still had stories to tell. And for me, the book was a complete joyride.
It's amazing. Those books, your books specifically, and I told this to Todd when we were off there earlier, they take, at least for me, they take me to a place in my memories and they make them very, very vivid. And it doesn't matter when, ironically, the book Season on the Brink, which was in 1985, and Where Nobody Knows Your Name in 2014, they take me to the same place because Season on the Brink, I was a 20-year-old kid when I read it, and Where Nobody Knows Your Name, it's a minor league baseball. That takes me to Louisville and the AAA team for the Cardinals and A. Ray Smith, and it was true minor league baseball, but it was fun, but it's just memories. It's just great memories, and it takes me to the same place, and it's a great escape. I mean, good books are amazing, and that's why people read them, obviously. But
well, I'm being reminded of that right now because I've been able to catch up on a lot of reading these last 7-8 weeks, and I've enjoyed that aspect of this. You're right, Jim. And what I always say is when somebody finishes one of my books or a column or whatever, I want them to say, "I didn't know that." That's my goal. It can be, "I didn't know that about what it's like to play for Bob Knight." It can be, "I didn't know that about life on the PGA Tour." Or it can be, "I didn't know that about Bjorn Broman or Chris Clemens, who played at Campbell and nobody recruited him because he was 5'9", and he graduated a year ago from Campbell as the third all-time leading scorer in the history of the NCAA. And most college basketball fans never heard of him. I love having someone come up to me or someone write to me and say, "I didn't know that." That's my goal as a reporter because I've been given extraordinary access through the years. And in fact, I've always said if I ever sit down and write a memoir, the title might be Authorized Personnel Only, because I've spent so much time being allowed to go to those places. And if I get that opportunity, I feel like I have almost an obligation to the reader to take them with me.
If you were, let's say, if you were doing a speaking event in the state of Indiana, the introduction for you would include the title of the book and, the author of A Season on the Brink and that stuff. Outside of the state of Indiana, would it be the same nationally? If you were being introduced in Texas somewhere, would you be introduced?
It's a great question, because I have spoken in the state of Indiana on a number of occasions, and you're 100% right. Season on the Brink comes up first. Usually, in other places, the introduction says the author of the 2 best-selling sports books of all time, which is great to hear. A good one for Season on the Brink. But it also depends on the audience. If it's a golf audience, the focus might be more on the golf books. If it's a basketball audience, certainly Season on the Brink comes up right away. And what I've always said about Season on the Brink is this: I don't think it's my best book, because it was my first book, and I was still learning how to be an author. Now, I had the extraordinary access that Bob gave me that allowed me to write the book the way I did, and I think the best thing I did, the smartest thing I did, was just sort of get out of the way and let the story tell itself. I hope I'm better now than I was in 1986, but without any question, Season on the Brink was the most important book I wrote for me, because its success has allowed me to go on and pick and choose my topics for future books. It's why I was able to write Where Nobody Knows Your Name. It's why I was able to write A Civil War about the Army-Navy rivalry. It's why I was able to write The Back Roads to March, because the success Season on the Brink had, and by the way, 5 publishers rejected my proposal and turned it down. And I was paid $17,500 as an advance for the book. Had to take a pay cut to take a leave of absence from the Washington Post, which I wouldn't have regretted even if the book didn't sell well. But Season on the Brink put me into I'll tell you this quickly. Bob didn't speak to me for 8 years, as people I think know, after the book came out. And the first time we spoke was in Hawaii in 1994. Indiana was playing out there. I was out there with Maryland. I was walking through the hotel lobby with Gary Williams, the Maryland coach, and sure enough, we run into Knight. And Todd, did you ever meet Bob Murray, who did Bob's clinics for years?
Yes.
I don't know if you did.
Yep, I did.
But yeah, so Bob was with Bob Murray, and they stop, and Bob Knight starts speaking to me like we last spoke an hour ago. How you doing? Hey, I heard you had a son. How's that going? And we talked, very cordially for several minutes. And when they walked away, Gary Williams looked at me and said, "After all the things he said about you, why would you speak to him?" And I said, "Because he built my house." And I've always, not only did he build my house, he helped build my career.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like Angelo Pizzo who with Hoosiers. I mean, that was their first movie, and it was just a smash success, and it allowed them to make the other movies he talked about. But, yeah, it's just crazy, the love of the sport in this state. But timing was great as well. But, man, it would not have been fair to the rest of the world had you not been able to do what the rest of your body of work, because it's just it's the best-selling author of all time when it comes to sports. So that
was a very humble way to tell me what a stupid question I asked. Saying I just have the 2 most famous and best-selling sports books of all time.
No, it was actually a very good question, because I am introduced in different ways depending on the circumstance. It's a good question, and the answer in terms of Indiana is, you bet, Season on the Brink comes up first.
I'll never refer to you any differently other than the best-selling.
I do like that description, actually.
I do too. I
guarantee it. I promise you. John, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us. I know you're busy, even though we're in this time, but you've got plenty to do, like you said. But it has been an absolute thrill for us, both of us. We've both talked about this, looking forward to it, and just wish you the absolute best. Hope you guys stay safe up there in New York. I know it stinks for all of us, but, man, I know it's tough for you guys up there and all the people up there, and we're all thinking of them, and hope we do get through all this, because at the end of the day, it's all about us and the world. So, but, man, I'm just excited. I wish this day doesn't end. It could go on all day, Todd.
Yep. No, this has
Well,
been,
thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And by the way, Todd, I should have mentioned, you asked about ex-Indiana players interviewing me. Of course, I've been on with Dan Dockich about 1 million times. Dockich will never forgive me for forgetting that.
Yeah, I was. I know for a fact that would you'd probably been called about noon today. You would have been on his show.
Noon? Are you kidding? Probably by 10 a.m.
Yeah, no, I know. Danny was he was obviously an assistant the whole time I was there, and obviously
right.
A great one for us. So,
I've told this story before. I'll tell it real quick. I know you guys got to go, but Dan was a grad assistant the year I was there in '86. He had graduated the year before, and he and I hung out a lot together. And we came up with this brilliant diet plan because we were both trying to lose weight. And we went and had lunch every day at a Chinese all-you-can-eat buffet. So an Indiana grad and a Duke grad combined, and that's what we came up with.
That's what you came up with? Are you sure you weren't trying to lose hair? Because Danny was very successful at losing his hair.
Danny's done better at losing hair than I have, that's for sure. I will say that much.
I wouldn't say it if I didn't love him.
He's completely bald. He shaved himself bald the other day. Did you see that? He posted it online.
He told me he was going to do that. I was on the show when Backroads to March came out, and he mentioned me off air that he was getting ready to do that, and probably a good move, actually.
I mean,
might as well embrace it, right?
It would take about 8 seconds. I mean, how long could that take?
Well, he kept
I'm not going any
ESPN.
farther because he'll drive from Indiana to my house to get me if we go on much longer.
Oh, he's a great one, John. I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you so much. You have really made our week, and it's been a thrill. And hopefully, we'll get to do it again someday.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care. Stay safe.
This is Jim Coyle from Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle and Leary. Indiana Sports Beat is now a part of the Rivals Network. You can go to thehoosier.com to sign up. It's free. Catch the show there each day live or at your convenience. You can also like or follow us on Facebook, follow the show's rebroadcast, anywhere you podcast. If we're not on a radio station where you live, we should be. Let your local station know they need to carry Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle and Leary, or simply go to thehoosier.com.